Hello and welcome to Teachers in the Dungeon. I'm Tom Gross, and while Dan is off exploring new corridors of the dungeon, I have a guest host here to join me in the conversation today. We are going to talk about today our What We've Learned About series, and it fits perfectly because my guest host is a creator of what our topic is, and that is third-party creators and companies. So our guest is no stranger to Teachers in the Dungeon, and as he's been on in the past to talk about the series of monster books that he has created, as well as he's given us some insight during the OGL issues. Gosh, I don't even remember when that was now. It was in January of some year. And I'd like to welcome to the dungeon Andrew Cawood of Cawood Publishing. Hello, how are you?
Hey, Tom. Good to see you.
Good to visit with you as well. And, I would also be remiss if I didn't put this into your introduction as well, because I failed to mention that you have supported and will continue to support our RPG summer camp that we have in July. You met last year with a group of our dungeon masters to talk about, I'm trying to remember, it was tactics, I think, tactics or using monsters. I think it was using monsters in campaign. And this year you'll be talking about creating monsters. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. It took me back to my days of teaching high school again.
Yeah. And you'll discover this year with the growth of our camp, you'll be speaking with more students that are working on and aspiring dungeon masters. So last year you had, I think, 3 of them in the room, maybe 4. I think there are 4 in the room. And this year, I think you'll have upwards of 7 or 8 in there. Okay. So the camp is growing. We've got more students taking it for a second and third year. And so it's gone really well. And we, Dan and I, appreciate your support of that and your contribution at the camp when you join us virtually.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I love that you guys are doing that. I've always wondered why the game isn't made to be more accessible by young kids and teenagers.
Yeah, well, I will say they have a desire. They definitely have a desire to play role-playing games. And I think it was strong prior to the pandemic, but I certainly believe the pandemic and the forced separations and the not being able to be face-to-face with friends and just other people has really strengthened that. They discovered role-playing games over the pandemic, and now it's transitioned into more face-to-face games. But also, I know many students that I have that have still online games that they started in the pandemic, and those games have continued, and they're more regional or nationally based than locally based, which I think is super cool.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the main time I played it when I was younger was from, I think I started when I was around 9. Then I played it till about 16 or so. And then then I was gone. I didn't play for 30 years or something. Yeah, about 30 years, maybe even a bit more than that. Yeah, I think it's a great game for kids.
Yeah, and one thing that we're really, really excited about is we did a show a few weeks ago where we interviewed our dungeon masters, our student dungeon masters for Game Club this last year. And all of them were like, "Oh, I'm totally taking Dungeons and Dragons to college." And one of them was even, I already know that there's a group at my college that I'll be joining, and so I love to hear that. Even though I played all the way through college, the hard part is those years right after college when you're getting into your career and you move away from friends. And you find yourself in a new location, or you find yourself back in your hometown, and all those people are gone. So it's kind of like scratching your head going, now what? But I feel like, and maybe I'm just naive and I'm lucky because of where we live, but I feel like there are more game stores that do more play in the store these days, that hopefully those students that are leaving college or leaving a school where there's that community, they can go and create or join a new community when they go someplace. So, all right, let's start by, I'd like to get an update from you on your, you had a Kickstarter about 9 months ago now? Or 6 months, I can't remember now, but it was over your campaign setting, the World of Myrr. So I'm curious if you could give us I know I get updates because I contributed to the Kickstarter, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say about where the book is and how that is going.
Sure, yeah. So that was, I think, November we kickstarted it. And this is our world book for our World of Myrr, which is really our world that we've been writing for about 10 years. And we published a few of the continents in smaller books. Well, I guess one's not that small because it's 300 pages. And what we've done with this world book is we put all of the continents together, the whole world. So there's 9 continents, and it's mostly a system neutral book. There's not many mechanics in it, so you could use it for Pathfinder, 5e, OSR games. There's very little mechanics. There's just a few lines here and there, really. We're very close to finishing. We're just doing the final tweaks to the layout, and we have maps of each continent, which we're fitting into the book. Yeah, we're hoping the PDF will be ready, if not later this month, like it even could be a week or two. It might be July, and then the printed books should follow soon after that. And I would expect the public launch for that will be September to have the world book, but the Kickstarter backers should have it. Should have the PDF very soon, and the printed books likely in the summer.
Very nice.
Yeah, so that one has really progressed. It's definitely the most comprehensive thing we've done. It's incredibly detailed. You know, you've got all the settlements, you've got the factions mentioned, some of the history. There's homebrew locations that DMs could use as well. We kind of made it so it's similar to Greyhawk, where there's a lot of space for DMs to still do their own thing. So it's a really good template for basically any kind of game.
Ooh, I'm sensing a part of my answer that we'll have later on of things that I've learned from third-party creators that you have just given a hint to. So I'll keep that under wraps at the moment. And I wanted to mention, I know you've talked about it on this show before, but maybe for new listeners or listeners that have joined since they've heard your show, you mentioned you have very little statistical kind of work in the book, but I noticed in your Monsters of the Dungeon book that you have the conversion tables. Talk a little bit about how you've created, like how you've moved into that world.
Sure. So we decided we wanted to make our books more open to as many people as possible. So with the world book and then the current adventure that we're kickstarting right now, those books, we're going to have less mechanics in them and make them more open. However, when you have stat blocks, and most of our previous backers and readers have been dealing with 5e, what we did is we created conversion tables for those stat blocks. So for both Pathfinder editions, for OSC and for DCC, we created tables so you can convert most of the 5e stat blocks for those other games. And we provide those now with all our monster books, with our NPC book, and they're going to be also available with the world book as well. Although the world book won't have any 5e stat blocks in it. And they will be with the adventure books as well. We're making our first right now. Well, we're funding for it, and then hopefully we'll keep making those.
So you mentioned your Kickstarter that you just launched, and as this show drops, it's been out for about a week. So you launched this Kickstarter, and no rest for you. You finish up your world book and you turn right around to an adventure book. I do believe that there is a story that goes into how you chose the order of those two books, or you did a survey of people, and I remember participating in that. So maybe you can share a little bit about that, but talk about your Kickstarter that you just launched. Tell us how it came about and what you're creating.
Sure. So The Rise of the Mushroom King is an adventure. This Kickstarter goes till June 21st. And it is our first big adventure book. We've made some adventures before, but this is going to have tons of art by Travis, who's done our monster books and the world book. It's going to have custom-made maps, and it's made for multiple editions. It's also made for low, mid, and high levels. So there's options in the adventures so that you can run it for multiple levels. And it has new monsters. Of course, we have to have monsters. magic items, spells, and this is something we've been working on for a while. So I was actually able to take a bit of a break between the World book and this book because I'd written this adventure a while ago. What we did with our last few Kickstarters is we polled people and said, first of all, what level adventure would you like? And we used the 4 levels from the core book and then the tiers. And then we asked them, what are your favorite creatures? And we asked people, what settings do they like? So we found out that the settings that people were most interested in were dungeon and city. And we found out that the most popular creature is the Fey creature. And second, the monster type. The second monster type on the list, and those 2 were much higher than everything else, was the aberration. So then I looked at what adventures we had that are connected to the world, because I have about a dozen ideas or adventures that I've run. And I found one that really fits that combination of city and dungeon. And what we did was we took a theme that we had in our Underworld book about these toxic spores being spread through the Underdark, through the underworld. And I'd always wanted to expand on that and show what happened when these creatures reached the surface world. This adventure is, you enter into a settlement. It could be anywhere. It could be in our World of Myrr, but as long as it's a basic settlement, basically. It's a marketplace and everything seems orderly and peaceful, and the players can buy products and stock up on supplies. And then things start to go haywire because these mutants start attacking people, and the characters have to follow the clues, which will lead them eventually to a dungeon area and then to the underworld. However, what we've done, I always want to have options for DMs. So there's multiple ways the players can go from the city area to the dungeon area, and then from the dungeon area into the underworld. There's a lot of different pathways. So one of my goals in writing the book was, how many options can I give the DM? And throw aside some of those assumptions that people have about writing adventures for our systems. Throw aside the assumptions that you can't do multiple levels. And as I did it more and more, looking at it, I thought, I realized really this is workable. You can do this. You don't have to have it for one level, like one tier, and you don't have to have it for one system. If you look at an adventure, what's in each encounter? There's the description of the encounter, there's monsters, and there's treasure. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's a mechanic around perception or investigation or something similar, or a saving throw, right? So most of those things that had mechanics, you can present in terms of language, and then the DM can choose with whatever system they're using to deal with it.
Okay.
There are some things like a saving throw for a trap, for example, where you have to be more prescriptive. And those are the few cases where, it's more of a 5e focus. But for the most part, it's language and the mechanics are moved aside.
So something you said that is part of the build of this adventure that you mentioned that I am going through the struggle of it right now as a dungeon master, because I wanted to play a pre-published adventure, but our campaign is sitting at 7th, 8th, 9th level area. And this adventure was written to start at 5th level. So I'm in this dungeon. It's been a long time since I've done a dungeon crawl, which I love doing. And they're just cleaning up. And so each session, I'm like, okay, I need to add more to this. And so then I try to add a little bit more and come in, they clean up that group. And so I've gone like 5 or 6 sessions and I'm still struggling to get the encounters to match where they are. So it sounds like you've developed a system or a method to make that adjustment for the DM.
Yeah, part of it is just that, that I've DM'd for so long, and then I spent, 6 years writing monsters. So part of it is just I'm so used to, okay, what would be a good encounter for the first tier, sort of first to fourth level, first to fifth level, and then what would be good for. So we've divided it up into low means first to about fourth or fifth level, and then mid is like 5 to 10, and then high is 11 and above.
Okay.
So what we've done is the base adventure is low level. Because the other thing I realized is, especially if you have a city for the beginning part of the story, those ones you don't have to actually have mid and high level options as much. Because if you're going to the inn and seeing the innkeeper, it's unlikely they're going to be a 5th level fighter or a 10th level fighter. If you go into the alchemist's shop, in most places, it's unlikely they're going to be a high level, a mid-level or even a high-level wizard. It's possible. So there are some encounters where I just left it the same. And there's encounters that make sense, right? Like if you're in a dungeon and there's very likely there could be giant rats or a swarm of rats. So I would leave that the same no matter what level the characters were, because it's part of the world making sense, right? And the marketplace, there's not going to be a dragon wandering around or a giant sitting off to the side, right?
Right.
So partly it's what makes sense in the world. And then what I did is the encounters that are the key ones, which I'd still say it's about 60, 70% of the encounters. Then I gave a mid or high, or sometimes the mid and high option is the same. Again, that would make it realistic in the world. So after each encounter, I put, for most of them, I have mid, and then I write down an option that the DM could use for the monster, and then a high and an option. And if there's treasure, I also have mid and high options.
Right.
And then what we did was that the base adventure, you just need the core books or the monsters in the adventure. So you don't need to have our monster books. But for the mid and high level, some of those options, those are from our books.
Okay.
I think that's a good balance where, if you want to run the adventure, the basic version, you don't need to have any extra books for the creatures. But the mid and high level, then we're going to expand it out to include some of our other monsters.
So again, you said something that really validates something that I've done and that I was planning. I'm planning on. So I'm talking to the kids at our summer camp about building a dungeon. And what I really like that you said is that there can be, just because you have high level characters doesn't mean there might not be a swarm of rats. The world is the world. Yeah. And so there are times when I'm like, okay, does it hurt for a first or second level adventure to come across a very difficult creature or difficult, encounter where they can be like, okay, this is too much for us. We're going to need to talk our way out of this and let them do so, because the world is the world. I might be driving down the street and encounter something that's just awful. And then again, I just drive right over something that is very simple. So I like that you give me as the DM the permission to say, it's okay to have easy things. It's okay to have hard things, but we do want to find a balance to try to meet where those players are someplace.
Like you said, like I was mentioning the rats, and as you said, the opposite is true. It's okay to have the party see a dragon in the distance. Or one adventure I have that we published, that is it was our first big campaign in Myrr, which we published. It's called Adventures in Myrr. And at one point early on, the characters find out there's rumors that this one manor is home to nobles who are actually vampires. So they know right away in this big city to avoid this family like the plague, literally. However, they are interested in getting into the manor because there's something in there they want. So they wait until they're pretty sure that it's empty. And then they break in. And so that's a good example where this manor is owned by a very, powerful vampire that could kill the whole party. but they break in, and that adventure actually, it took us more than a session where they're going around this manor looking for clues, but the manor has animated constructs protecting it.
Nice. That's cool.
And those constructs are balanced to be close to their level, although one of the things that was there was the rug of smothering, which is in the core rules.
Ooh,
and the gnome wizard almost died being suffocated by the rug. And they were only, I don't even know if they were, they might have been second level, but they were first or second. So yeah, I think it's nice to have a world that seems realistic. And in the realistic world, those more dangerous creatures and NPCs are going to be there. And B, it's great to foreshadow some of the enemies and some of the other factions in the world.
Right. So this is Rise of the Mushroom King, an adventure for 5e and other RPGs. When I saw the title and I saw the picture, I was like, oh, this is an Andrew Cawood publication right here. I love it. I love it. The picture. And remind me of the artist's name again.
That's Travis Hansen, who's done all the monster books and our world book. He has a daily web comic called Life of the Party. The other thing, which I'm always reminded of when people mention the Mushroom King and his illustration there, is that we've also added an optional ending. So if you want to run the adventure as a complete story that just ends as far as that kind of quest, you can do that. However, we also give you an optional ending that will tie into the next adventure. And I absolutely love this optional ending because it's the most diabolical twist that I think a lot of DMs will use. Even if they don't connect the adventure to future stories, I think many people will love to use this ending. But I know some people won't. And so I'm giving them the option of, okay, you don't have to go that far, but here's an option.
So cool. So cool.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the Kickstarter. How does it, I don't Kickstart enough. In fact, your books are the only ones I've Kickstarted. So talk to me a little bit about how the goals met and the higher those goals, the further you meet those goals, what are those goals? Stretch goals. Yeah. How does that work? And what are some of the things that will come into yours or could potentially come into your book?
Sure. So when you have the base amount that you want to fundraise, and you need to reach that by the end date for us, June 21st. Otherwise, you don't get the funds. However, ideally, you fund earlier than that, and then you can make the product even better. So with this adventure, that would mean going from 10 new monsters to 20 new monsters, which is a huge bonus. I think 20 monsters in a book. That's a fifth of the Phelan book, for example, right? So that's what would happen. We could add in more spells, more magic items, more art. We have a new person doing maps. Their company is the Voyages Workshop, also from Canada. And we could have an extra map or two. We could also expand the story more. So there's a number of ways that we could make it better for the backers, and potentially even a longer book. Right now, the base book would be about 72 pages. So potentially it could be bigger as well. So, and we're going to announce those as the Kickstarter goes on. We used to give the stretch goals right at the beginning, but now we want to get more funding before we reveal that. But those are the kind of things that we're looking at. And yeah, hopefully we'll fund before June 21st, and we can start getting into the stretch goals. The other thing in Kickstarters is you can have add-ons. So say for example, this PDF, it's about $12 US. So if you chose that, then you could also add on other products of ours that are listed, like the monster books.
Okay.
Or even we have a comic book and some other books there. The comic book's only like about $3 US. So if you wanted to add the comic book to your pledge, you would pledge your $12 US, and there's no shipping because that's a PDF. And then you would pledge, and then you would just add $3. And then after the Kickstarter's done, when we send out the backer kit, which is an online store really of options, you could then choose that comic book and you've already paid for it.
Okay.
And you can do that before the end of the Kickstarter, or you could do that after.
Oh, okay. Because there's time.
So when we send out emails to get information for people for shipping and things like that after the Kickstarter, then they receive the backer kit, and then you have the option of purchasing other books.
All right. Well, June 21st, Kickstarter, Rise of the Mushroom King. Awesome. We'll give a reminder on that before we close out the show, but I do want to move into the topic of today's show, which is what we've learned about third-party creators. And so we each have about 3 or 4 different items that we will give. And as Dan and I do, we oftentimes will overlap or things like that. And so no worries on that. But I think I'll start with you to get it started, and then we'll just kind of play back and forth from there.
Sure. All right. So looking at third-party creators, and we've worked with a number of these companies, and obviously we see a lot of what they're doing because we're selling products together in the same marketplaces in many ways. A lot of things I think also were revealed in the OGL controversy because this community had to try to work together. So I think the biggest thing that I notice from third-party creators is that they are, in general, obviously they're going to be creative people, but they're also divergent thinkers, and they're quite rebellious. So it reminds me of the rebels in Star Wars.
Okay.
And how most of these creators have decided just to strike out on their own. And many of them could be working for a corporation, but they've decided that they are going to take the riskier road and do it themselves.
Okay. So I'm going to ride on the wave of that and say, from the consumer point of view, I think that's great, because my first point was what I've learned about third-party creators is how all of you guys make the game, what's the word, richer, you give it more depth. And so I like this rogue idea that these creators are just going out on their own because, and I think we've talked about it on the show before, but I feel like third-party creators and making this, and maybe you can confirm or deny, is that I feel like you can sometimes take a risk that a corporation can't because, well, just for a variety of different reasons. And so if that risk really works and people bite it, eat it up, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's such a great idea, or that's a great monster or magic item or something like that, then that's a win. But if it doesn't, you just go on and make another one, right? I mean, help me out here. I know that I'm kind of simplifying it all right there, but that's what I think is cool from my point of view as a player and a dungeon master. Is I go to third parties to find those unique pieces that I'm not going to find someplace else. And I guess that's why I call it a risk, is because you're like, well, I see what they've done, being the corporation, Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro, whatever. And you go, okay, that's cool, but what if we did it this way? To me, that's the risk. But that's why I come to a third party.
Yeah, 100%. Partly it works because that's what actually eventually works in the marketplace. Because if you just do the same typical thing, why would you buy a product that's the same as the corporate product? Right. So those are the kind of things, the very creative projects are the ones that are, probably going to take off more. It's not 100% like that. There are other factors as well. Sometimes the lowest denominator is popular. The other thing that happens though with our area is that a lot of the traditional fantasy terrain has been abandoned by the corporations, sometimes because they say that things are problematic or there's lots of reasons why they say what they do. Like one of the things that we've done is concentrated a lot on heroic fantasy and on, we don't glorify our big bad evil guys and our villains. We show them for what they are. And I'm pretty sure our company has published way more good characters and monsters than any other company has ever done. Most companies lean towards the evil side, and the corporate stuff is usually glorifying the villains in our current cultural times. And we do the opposite. So there's some territory that's been abandoned that, TSR, for example, used to occupy, or other creators. And now some of the rebellion is actually to go back and take territory that's been left behind and abandoned. Because, like I've mentioned to you before, as far as I'm concerned, so much of the storytelling is about archetypes, and archetypes are indestructible. So you can abandon that territory, but there are still stories to be told there.
I know one thing that we talked about in a past show when we talked about Monsters of the Dungeon was I loved how each of your sections starts with a hero, but it's not such a hero that they're like out of bounds of being able to play with an ordinary campaign. Most of your heroes that are in that book, they're like 3rd, 4th level at most.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so super accessible to a DM to insert into a party. And like you said, puts a focus on the good rather than trickery and evil at all times. Yeah.
And I think, that's also with our city book. When the artist said, I have a great idea. You have 7 districts. Why don't we tie the districts to the 7 sins? And I said, that's a incredible connection. Great idea. I said, however, what I would like to do is also add the virtues.
Yes.
So at the beginning of each section in the city book, you get the virtue and the sin. So I like having that because I think for DMs, it gives them an option to balance the world a bit. I think it's a lot of fun when you're playing, when you actually have some allies, when the world is not completely dark, right? So we've done that in the World of Myrr too. There's places that are evil kingdoms, and there's wastelands, and there's areas. There's one area where a cult has taken over the whole place, but there are still strongholds of good. Much like what Tolkien did with his stories.
Sure.
And I think in storytelling, it's nice to have some kind of balance in there, at least some of the heroes, right? Even in Star Wars, where the rebels were massively outgunned in the original trilogy, it's still, they had some allies, and you knew they weren't completely alone.
Right.
So I think it adds something to storytelling, and I think it adds something to the darkness because it helps define it.
What's another aspect of third parties creators that you've learned over the years?
All right. So another big thing I've noticed is the resourcefulness. So you have to, I think as any small business, you have to be very resourceful. But I've noticed that is a very strong trait with all the artists and writers that I've run into. And people will do things like they'll team up together. For example, in Kickstarters, often other third-party creators will contact you when they're kickstarting at the same time, and they'll say, "Hey, would you like to cross-promote?"
Oh,
I probably have had we've been doing it for about 8 years or so, about that, and I'd say probably 100 messages of people wanting to do that over 8 years easily.
Really?
Yeah. People I've never heard of who decided, okay, let's team up now if we can help each other. And people who are very creative in solving problems. You have problems when you're trying to figure out the layout, when you're trying to figure out how can you make this an affordable product, when you're trying to figure out how to advertise this and how to promote yourself. You have to be very resourceful. There's so much sort of stimulation and input on the internet and in the world, and so many products and so many visuals. You have to find a way to stand out somehow. Especially promoting Kickstarters is very challenging now because it's very competitive.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to find new ways of doing things. Like this time we've teamed up with a company that makes terrain, and we're cross promoting. So we're actually building the marketplace, we're building the part of the dungeon area, and we're building part of our underworld in the story from the maps from our adventure, and we're building those with their terrain and then cross promoting.
Oh, cool. Okay, so that what I'm hearing you say is it is, even though it's a competitive field with the third party creators, it's collegial as well. Somewhat willing to work with each other to help each other out.
I would say there's a difference. There are people who are really split, and there is there's a very small kind of group of the main publishers. Like, I really wouldn't say some of those big third party companies are really third party. Like, if you're making millions of dollars and you're a corporation and you have like 20, 30, 40, 50 people or more, that's not really what we're talking about as far as an indie creator,
Right.
And there are people who, there's lots of politics and competition, and there are some people who don't, work with others as much, but there is still a group, like, for example, Limitless Adventures, another third-party company that we know fairly well. We've cross-promoted a lot with them. We promote them and support them as much as we can. Basically, the people who, it's a very simple process where, you're doing us a favor and we're doing you a favor, and we're in this together. Hey, let's, why don't we team up? So there are some of the resourceful publishers who are like that.
And I suppose in order to be able to do that, you have to have confidence in your product, because, you're making a decision to, hey, I'm going to send my people your way, but knowing and having confidence that they'll stick with us, but hey, let's show them somebody else or something else, a new idea. So I think that's really cool. And it builds into my second one pretty well, I think. And before I get to mine, though, I wanted to point out that Limitless Adventures, those guys are great. I don't know if you know this, they help out with our summer camp as well.
Yes. Yeah.
You do that. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Where mine heads, something that I've learned over the years, because I can't tell you how many years, and there's probably a reason why, for so many years, I thought it was just Dungeons and Dragons. I thought that was it. You just bought the books, you played the game, you made up your own stuff, homebrew, all that kind of stuff. And I don't know how long ago it was that I was like, hey, wait, this is out here too, and this is out here. I think is when I started going to some gaming conventions and really getting my eyes open to the full community, and not just the books that I can pick up at Barnes and Noble and things like that. And so what I've learned about third-party companies is, once you find one, kind of learn about that one, rather than saying, doing the walk down the aisle where you're taking pamphlets and I'm trying all like these 30 different. It becomes so overwhelming as the consumer / player that I get so to where I go, okay, I'm just going to go back to what I know, and that is the rule books. And I've got the other books sitting to the side, and I just never get to it because it's so much. And so I know, in the last 2 or 3 years, I've really narrowed it down. Like I use your books a lot. I can't say too much because there might be people from my adventure that listen to this, but I used a creature from your Monsters of the Dungeon the other day, and he's going to be in there quite a bit, badgering them along the way. And so, I got that from your books just by flipping through, but I've got several of your books. And so I'm really kind of really diving into one company. It's not just you, but we mentioned, I think we mentioned Cobalt Press. That's another one that I actually started with and sort of have used their magic. They have a book of magic, deep magic, and they have a monster compendium, the Creature Codex. And so between those two books and your books, that's really my third party circle right now. I did pick up another set of books that I just couldn't resist. They're in the most odd place. They were at a hobby store, Michael's or something like that around here. And you may have heard of them. It's Jeff Ashworth's books. they all start with the Game Master's Book of. And I'm trying to get to that so I can tell everybody who the publisher of that is, Media Lab Books. But one thing I liked about theirs is they are really niche-y. Like he has a whole book on just non-player characters. And so it's, that's something I keep to the side, and when I'm wanting to challenge my players, I mentioned the dungeon and I'm like, they are just cleaning up this dungeon. So I looked through this book, Traps, Puzzles, and Dungeons, that's Jeff Ashbrook put together. So, but those are ones I just sort of pick through when I really have a struggle. But yours and Kobold Press are the two that I've circled through the most. And so what I've learned is take a look at what everybody has, but find one or two that really work for you, that make sense to you, and learn those and use those. And then once you've got that, then kind of, if you feel the need, then go and look at other groups as well. Does that sit well with a creator?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm the same. Yeah, I'm the same way. I mean, you want to find something that really resonates with you, and there's kind of different levels of quality too that you can discern. Yeah, I do the same thing. I mean, that's the same with me for pretty much all the art and gaming that I look into, especially like a certain gaming studio who's making video games. I probably will focus on, if I find I like a couple of their games, I'll be like, oh, that's interesting. I really like what they do. So that it's similar as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Okay. Another thing you've learned, are you out, or do you still have a couple?
No, I have at least one more. The other one I've noticed is that there's a lot of, I would call them a lot of characters. And it's interesting, that's the kind of people who would end up publishing third-party creative works. But I've met a lot of interesting people who are involved in third-party work, whether they're artists or they're writers or they're making terrain or they're painting miniatures. There's a lot of really interesting people who have had often they've done a lot of other occupations, and they have interesting hobbies. So like, for example, when I started, I met this miniature painter who we found out what we had in common was we used to work in the hotel industry. And so we had all these stories to share, and and it was interesting too, because he worked in the back of the house and I worked in the front of the house. And there's a lot of, in that industry, there's a lot of stereotypes about each of those worlds. And so he and I were kind of learning about, sort of, even though we were from that industry, we're from very different parts of it. There's also a lot of people I've met who, it's not a group who usually listens to a lot of top 40 or mainstream music. I've met a lot of people who are heavy metal fans, or people like me who are really into alternative music. I'm more kind of, in general, I like lots of music, but really my core love probably is 80s new wave. So you can imagine me, that's what I'm listening to when I was making the monster books. And you can actually see there's a lot of musical influences in those books. We've talked about David Bowie before, but there's others. And this group too, these characters, I've learned a lot of, I've learned about a lot of new movies I've never heard of, or art I've never seen, or books I've never read. For example, the artist who usually works with us, Travis, usually every couple of months, we talk all the time, but every couple of months there's something new that I discover, because he comes from like sort of a comic book background.
Okay.
And on the West Coast in the States, which is very different from where I grew up. So yeah, in general, just a very interesting group who've often had different careers, and not a lot of people who've gone from like A to Z. Not a lot of people who just finished high school, went to college, got a job. A lot of people who've had very winding paths.
So this works out really well with my third one, and it's actually my last one. But and that is that I put down that third-party creators are much more accessible to us as fans and as players and DMs. I've learned that when you email a third-party person, especially when you talk about indie, they email back. and they will chat, with you, or they will do, live things on Instagram or stuff like that, just to talk with fans. And while I realize that there's marketing to that, you don't have the money. Most third parties don't have the money to, put an advertisement, at a game store or go to a giant convention and things like that. So you use and leverage social media and things like that. But on my side of things, I'm like, that is super cool. I can talk to Andrew Cawood and listen to him on his podcast and all those things and learn about you as the third party creator, or anybody. I mentioned Jeff Ashworth or Michael at Limitless. As fans, we can reach out to you all as third party creators. And in most cases, you reply, you respond, you make yourself accessible. And I think that's phenomenal. And to me, that is a definite positive. We always hear all the negatives of social media, but this is one place where I think it's a huge benefit to everybody. I get to learn about your product. You get to learn about me as a player and the things that I think are cool. You did the polling through the Kickstarter to find out, hey, what do you guys want next, and things like that. And you get to show that interest in us that really makes us feel important as well. And so that's another thing that I've really learned is, you guys are super, super accessible. Because honestly, as a player, as a kid growing up, if I ever had the chance to meet Ed Greenwood, which I have now as an adult, but as a kid, that would have been like, whoa, I can't talk to him, or, all that kind of stuff. Gary Gygax, are you kidding me? But now with the accessibility that we have, and again, some of it's the constraints as well. You don't have corporate constraints and layers to dig through to be able to get to the fans. And so I think that's super cool.
Yeah, I've had the same experience as you, because, I've also obviously contacted third-party companies, whether I was a customer or, we were cross-promoting, and I've had the same, experience. One of the things that actually makes it easier, again, is that we're not as, we can be a lot more agile, right? We're not as, if you email us, for example, you're going to get one of two people, and, the message is going to get around really quickly. Or if somebody emails, for example, sometimes we send out codes for books for people to claim their book. We don't leave those codes up forever, because unfortunately pirates will grab them as well. Mm-hmm. So then I'll have a customer, former backer, contact me and say, can you give us an updated code? Well, we can do that almost right away usually, because again, the email is going to be, one or two people probably, and we usually will be able to get back to them. So we can be quite agile. And you also, you really want to take part in the community. You're so close to it, because usually you're a gamer as well. Although there are some people who publish stuff who don't play it. And it's a really nice experience. I had somebody actually from Europe the other day who I was on Discord, because we have a Discord server, and they said, do you mind if we just chat for a moment, with the voice? And I said, sure. And this person was so excited, you could just tell they were vibrating. and it was just so great to see that they were so happy to talk about a book, and they were so grateful that you'd taken, a few minutes out of your day or whatever. So yeah, I think there are ways that being a third party, being a small company, actually makes things easier for you to connect, especially as you said, with technology now. It's kind of amazing.
Indeed it is. And that is what that's probably the biggest thing I've learned is all the creativity that you guys offer us, and on top of it, your accessibility to be able to visit with all of us as well. So I want to give you one last time. You've been super generous with your time today, but I want to give you one last opportunity to tell all of the listeners about your Kickstarter and any last final thoughts you have about that, or even just what you've learned about third party, and then we'll wrap the show up.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, one more thing about that I have off the top of my head about third-party creators is we've sort of mentioned it today is just how independent they are. So that's another thing I noticed very clearly. They're very happy to go it alone, and again, part of that goes together with their resourcefulness. And as far as the Kickstarter, again, we go till June 21st. We've got, I think, some very good deals there. I mentioned before the PDF is about $12 US. The softcover book is about $22 US. And we have a really great deal where you get all our monster books and the adventure with PDF version. And that's about $40 US, which is $7.
Wow.
7 books. So that is an amazing deal. Yeah, and if we do get to our target goal, then there's a good chance with the stretch goals we can make this even bigger and better.
Very good. Well, I can vouch that your books are great. I own several of them, and you're great to work with. You keep people up to date. I get regular updates through email or maybe it's through Kickstarter that tell us where the book is. You send some teaser images and items like that. That is always great. I look forward to all of those every time. Well, Andrew, it's been wonderful visiting with you today to talk about third-party creators, to talk about the work that you are doing to support all of us and giving us options and new worlds and creatures and magic items and all those great things. So, Andrew, where can people reach out to you and find your material, as well as if they do want to, as we mentioned earlier, reach out to you and ask a question? Where can people do that?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me visit the dungeon today, Tom. So
yes.
Our main website is World of Myrr, MYRR.com. And then we're on X as Cawood Publish, and we're on Instagram as Cawood Publishing, Facebook as World of Myrr. We have our own Discord server, and we're on YouTube now. So we're Cawood Publishing on YouTube. So we're all over the place.
Awesome. Well, to wrap up, for Andrew Cawood, I am Tom Gross. Check out the Kickstarter because I guarantee you it's a roll of the 20. Thanks a lot, everybody, and we will talk to you next week. So long.